The economic system is itself utterly dependent on the biosphere and the services that nature performs. And yet the economic system we all are embedded in now either ignores those services or discounts them. You know, you can see it in every time someone suggests there should be a carbon tax. My God, the screaming that goes on. That should be a freebie. Those things we take for granted. We don't put a cost on them. I fought for years to stop the logging in the clear-cut logging practices in British Columbia, where I live. And in the 1980s, Ruby Dunstan, who was the chief of the Lytton Indian Band, asked me if I would help her people because the BC government had given Fletcher Challenge, a New Zealand forest company, a permit to log the Sacred Valley of the Lytton Indian Band, and they didn't want any logging to go on. So I agreed to help them, and she flew me in a helicopter up that valley. And as we flew up, she pointed out the sacred burial sites along the cliffs over a river. She pointed out the vast stretches of bushes where grizzly bears and humans go to gather berries in the summer. She showed me where the salmon spawning beds were, and a site where her people had fought a battle with a neighboring tribe 200 years before. And when we landed, the helicopter pilot got out and just shook his head. He said, "You know, it's amazing. I took a group of forestry company executives and politicians up the same route last week, and all they talked about was board feet, volumes of pulp, jobs, and profit." Two groups of people looking down at exactly the same forest and seeing fundamentally different things. I had a confrontation with a forest company executive once, and Bob knows him very well. And finally, in frustration, he said to me, "Listen, Suzuki, are tree huggers like you willing to pay to protect those trees? Because if you're not willing to pay, those trees don't have any value till someone cuts them down." And that's when, for me, that was an epiphany, because I realized he was absolutely right. In our economic system, as long as that forest is intact, all of the green things in that forest are taking carbon dioxide out of the air, putting oxygen back in it. Not a bad service for an animal like us. If they weren't doing that, we'd be dead. But you know what economists call that? They call that an externality. I didn't know that was a fancy economic term, but what it means is we don't give a shit about it. It's not in the economy. You got to ask, wait a minute, what planet is this economy for? Because it sure as hell isn't the planet I live on. Those trees pump millions of gallons of water out of the soil, transpire them into the air, modulating weather and climate, an externality. Those trees, that forest, supports pollination of all of the flowering plants in the area, an externality. Those trees are clinging to the soil to prevent, every time it rains, to prevent the soil from running into the salmon spawning beds and spoiling them, an externality. And think of all of the countless species of plants and animals that remain and flourish as long as the forest is standing, and that's an externality. So the very things that keep the planet healthy and habitable for an animal like us, economists consider absolutely irrelevant to this system that they've invented. If that isn't a definition of madness, I don't know what is. Perhaps nothing then becomes more destructive than the discounting of nature's services, than this idea that the very definition of progress is economic growth. Growth has become the very goal that governments are established for. Growth is the reason why corporations exist and flourish. But wait a minute now, growth doesn't do anything for us. Growth is just a description of a system. Surely growth is not an end in itself. But you ask any ask any politician or business person how well they did last year. And within a second, they'll be talking about growth of the economy, of the GDP, of the market share or profits or jobs. Growth has become the very definition of progress. And of course, no one wants to impede progress. Nobody wants to be against progress. And if growth in the economy is progress, then nobody ever asks the important questions. What the hell is an economy for? How much is enough? Are there any limits? Are we happier with all this stuff? We don't ask those questions because we are just mindlessly searching for growth, growth, growth. Nothing in a finite world can grow forever. Our bodies, you know, they're pretty big, but compared to a single cell in our bodies, our body is pretty big. A human body on average has 100 trillion cells. That's 1 followed by 14 zeros. That's a lot of cells. 1 cell out of 100 trillion is nothing. And yet if 1 cell in that body decides, oh, well, I mean, it's a big body here, I'm just going to keep dividing forever, long before it becomes a mass of any great size, if you don't get rid of it, it'll kill us. Nothing within a finite world can divide or grow forever. Yet economists have not heeded the experience of cancer cells. They actually believe that the economy can, which it cannot, and must grow forever. Our home, the only one we have that supports not only us but all 30 million other species, is the biosphere. That's the zone of air, water, and land where all life exists. It's very, very thin. The late astronomer Carl Sagan used to tell us, if you shrink the Earth to the size of a basketball, the biosphere, where we all live, would be thinner than a layer of varnish that you paint on it. And that's it. That's our home. And it can't grow. It's fixed. And yet we have now got ourselves into a situation where the economic growth is seen as the be-all and end-all and the goal of every government, every corporation. I'm going to show you why this commitment to endless growth is suicidal. Anything growing steadily over time is called exponential growth, whether it's the number of trees you cut down, the amount of water you use, the amount of garbage you make, the size of your city, the number of people. Anything growing steadily over time is exponential growth and will have a predictable doubling time. So if it grows at 1% a year, it'll double in 70 years. 2% a year, it'll double in 35 years. 3% in 24 years. 4% in 17 and a half years. Anything growing steadily has a predictable doubling time. I'm going to give you a system analogous to planet Earth. And that is a test tube full of food for bacteria. That's the planet. And I'm going to put 1 bacterial cell in, and that bacterium is us. Okay? And it's going to begin to divide every minute. So at the beginning, at time 0, there's 1 bacterial cell. 1 minute, there are 2. 2 minutes are 4. 3 minutes are 8. 4 minutes, 16. That's exponential growth. And at 60 minutes, the test tube is completely packed with bacteria, and there's no food left. So this is a 60-minute growth cycle. When is a test tube only half full? Well, of course, the answer is at 59 minutes. 59 minutes is only half full. 1 minute later, it'll be completely full, right? So at 58 minutes, it's 25% full. 57 minutes, it's 12.5% full. At 55 minutes of a 60-minute cycle, it's 3% full. So if at 55 minutes, one of the bacteria says, hey guys, we got a population problem. The other bacteria would say, Jack, what the hell have you been smoking, man? 97% of the test tube's empty, and we've been around for 55 minutes. And they'd be 5 minutes away from filling it. So bacteria are no smarter than humans. 59 minutes ago, oh my God, Jack was right. What the hell are we going to do now? Well, don't give any money to those economists. Give it to those scientists. And in less than a minute, those scientists invent 3 more test tubes full of food for bacteria. So they quadruple the amount of food in space. You know, that would be like us finding 3 more planet Earths right nearby that we could start using right away. So they're saved. So what happens? At 60 minutes, the first one's full. 61 minutes, the second's full. 62 minutes, all 4 are full. By quadrupling the amount of food in space, you buy 2 extra minutes. This is not speculation or conjecture. This is simple mathematical fact. How can we add even a fraction of 1% more of air, water, soil or biodiversity. You can't. It's fixed. It can't grow. So, and every scientist I've talked to today, to this moment, agrees with me. We're already past the 59th minute. So if we're past the 59th minute and all this discussion about having more is still going on, it means we've got to accelerate what is a suicidal path. Now, when I say this in front of politicians and business people, except for Greens, then they get very, very angry at me. How dare you say we're past the 59th minute? Look at our stores, filled with stuff. Look at our people. We're living longer. We're healthier. How dare you say we're past the 59th minute? I say it without apology, because we have created the illusion that everything is all right by using up the rightful legacy of our children and our grandchildren. That's what we're doing. We're using up our basic biological capital rather than living on the interest. You don't have to believe me. I've been privileged to go to the heart of the Amazon, to the Serengeti, to the Arctic, and when I go to a community, I seek out the oldest person around, and I say, what was it like when you were a child? We've got two elders here who can tell us, what was it like here when you were a child? And all over the world, even in the heart of the Amazon, the answer is the same. It used to be so different. There used to be trees as far as you could see. The air used to be black with birds at certain times of the year. The rivers used to be jammed with fish. All over the world, our elders are a living record of enormous changes that have happened in the span of a single human life. Well, North Americans would always say, there's plenty more where that came from. The world has been fully occupied and fully developed by 30 million species for hundreds of thousands of years. When we drive a plant or animal out of existence where we are, do you think there's empty spaces somewhere for them to go? They're fully occupied. If they're not here, they're not anywhere. Americans would say, well, that's the price of progress. I don't think it's progress to use up the rightful legacy of our children and our grandchildren. So where does that leave us then? We all know that something is wrong. Our elders tell us that. But we have ways of avoiding confronting them, burying the stories in the back of the newspaper, saying, those damn scientists, they just exaggerate to get us all alarmed or to get bigger grants. I don't know what the rationale is. But you all know it. The oceans cover 71% of the planet. They're a mess. We've used them as garbage cans for decades. There are islands of plastic bigger than the state of Texas in the Pacific Ocean. We know that there are dead zones where nothing can live, increasing in size, duration, and number in every ocean on the planet. We know that at the rate of fishing and pollution of the oceans, according to scientists now, there will not be a single commercial species that we can exploit left in the oceans by 2050. And now with greater carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere, dissolving in the oceans as carbonic acid, we are acidifying the oceans with consequences we have no idea, really, in the long run. Forests, over 80% of the forests on the planet have now been isolated, fragmented, and destroyed. And if we carry on as we are now, in 20 years, there will not be a large intact forest left on the planet. We have used air, water, and soil to dump our most toxic compounds so that every one of us, even here in Hobart, you are all carrying dozens of toxic chemicals dissolved in your bodies and over a pound of plastic embedded in your bodies. Climate change, of course, is being caused, is indisputable and is far more serious than our media let on that they are. We've already set the experiment in motion with the only home that we know in the cosmos. And it will reverberate. Already what we've done will reverberate for centuries. So here we are as a species. We've shown ourselves to be incredibly clever, but lacking the humility to recognize that there are limits and that we don't know enough to manage the entire biosphere.